Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
How is everybody doing today? You are listening to the GSMC Football Podcast. My name is Wyatt Krieger, joining you today for this Saturday edition of the GSMC Football Podcast. And as always, I'm here to bring you all of the coverage on all football news from this past week. Before we get started, be sure to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football. Follow us on Facebook and visit gsmcpodcast.com. When you get the chance, you can listen on any platform, including iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and anywhere else you can listen to podcasts. As always, like, subscribe, leave a review, download, whatever you can. It helps us. Anywhere else, my personal Twitter is at WKrieger3, so go follow that if you'd like. And we appreciate all the listeners and feedback that you could provide. So thank you again. Today, we have a jam-packed episode per usual. Always love breaking down everything, all the news storylines that go on in the previous NFL week. So free agency is winding down. I'm going to get into who else got signed, who's on the board still, and I'm going to talk about the winners and losers of free agency so far. The Jameis Winston era is set to begin in New Orleans. I'm going to get into all of the implications of the Saints' new QB and what that means for New Orleans fans moving forward. I'm going to talk a little bit about the draft. It is coming up in April. So I'm going to specifically focus on who needs a quarterback, what teams might look to draft a quarterback in the later rounds. I've talked about some of the top quarterback prospects that I like, but I'm going to get into some of the lesser evaluated quarterbacks, some of the later rounds, guys that will be available for teams later on. And I'm also going to get into some off-season fun because, look, we have a long off-season ahead, a long summer. Some weeks won't be as rapid moving as other weeks in terms of overall news. So I'm going to have some segments to get to today. I'm going to introduce my power ranking of NFL division segment, and I'm going to get into a season preview. So I'm going to preview the season of one team each week. And so tune in later in the episode to find out about that. And I'm also going to get into a Deshaun Watson update, all the allegations regarding his off-the-field issues. So let's dive in. So first, I'm going to get into the free agency period. The free agency period is pretty much all but over, and it's kind of sad. I'm not going to be getting constant updates on Twitter like I was the past 2 weeks, but wow, what a free agency. Not too many marquee names going off the board, but a lot of quality players, a lot of veterans, and a lot of big transactions throughout the league and from a lot of different teams. So I'm going to get into all of that, everything I missed that I didn't cover in last weekend's free agency frenzy. Some big stories I missed, such as Juju Smith-Schuster and Kenny Golladay. I'm going to get into that first. I'm going to get into some other signings from big names across the league, and then I'm going to get into some winners and losers. So that's a segment I like to do for various different topics, but for today, I'm going to do winners and losers of free agency, the top 3 winners and the top 3 losers in my opinion. So first, let's get into Kenny Golladay and Juju Smith-Schuster. So Kenny Golladay, I predicted this on the show last Saturday, but I was recording beforehand, so I wasn't entirely sure. Some news came out Saturday morning that the Chicago Bears were really making a strong push to try to team up Allen Robinson and Kenny Golladay together. But at the end of the day, it was Dave Gettleman, the Giants GM and the New York Football Giants, who got the deal done. 4 years, $72 million with $40 million guaranteed. That's around $18 million a year. It's a pretty fair price, but I don't know if a lot of people were expecting Golladay to get that big of a deal, that long-term of a deal, and that much money guaranteed. But look, I've said this before. I think he's deserving of all of that money. He had back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons for the Detroit Lions in 2018 and 2019. He made the Pro Bowl in 2019. He's had 123 catches and 21 touchdowns in 47 games as a starter. So he's got a lot of mileage left on those legs. He's extremely productive. Like I said, 21 touchdowns, 123 catches in 47 games. That's just a lot of production from the wide receiver position. And he has a huge catch radius. That's one of the biggest things, is he can make incredible catches. He's a true number one. And at the end of the day, all of this comes down to Daniel Jones. So I don't really think Daniel Jones is the answer in New York. He had 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, playing through injuries last season. He had a bad ailing hamstring injury that was nagging throughout the year, but he hasn't really had a target like Kenny Golladay. So I'm actually really excited to see how he plays with this kind of security blanket on his team. So that's going to be an interesting development as the season moves on. But at the end of the day, the Giants had to make this move. The Giants GM, Dave Gettleman, he's on the last leg of his contract. He had to offer big money. He had to get all the skill positions, all of the players necessary to really get a final evaluation on Daniel Jones to kind of see if he's the guy or if they have to move on. So Dave Gettleman had to spend big money. But overall, I'm excited to see this Giants team because next year they're going to have a healthy Saquon. They're going to have a true number one in Kenny Golladay. And then their receiving core is pretty good because Darius Slayton, who had been their number one wide receiver, I think he can be a really good complementary number two. Evan Ingram made the Pro Bowl. Although a lot of people didn't really agree with that, I think Evan Ingram still has a lot of potential in this league to succeed. So you have Ingram, you have Slayton, and now you have Golladay to that mix along with Saquon. And as long as they shore up that offensive line in the draft, I think that offense will be pretty fun to watch. But again, this all depends on if Danny Jones can stay healthy and if he can play to his utmost potential. So Kenny Golladay to the Giants. Let's move forward. Juju Smith-Schuster, another wide receiver off the board. So after wide receivers were slow to go off the board, they started to fly off this past weekend. Reports say that Juju turned down more money from the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs to sign this 1 year, $8 million deal with the Steelers. Juju Smith-Schuster is talented. I don't know if he's really a true number one or he's really close to a true number one, but I don't know if he has the same attributes as Kenny Golladay, the same big play ability and the same overall production with the talent. But Juju still is as talented as they come. When you look at the size, the speed, the youth, and how he does all the little things, he's a great blocking wide receiver. Teammates like him. Although there was that off-the-field drama all throughout last year with the Steelers after starting 11-0 and then dropping their last 5 games, I think Juju fits well in that locker room. The players like him. But why sign for less money? Because he only signed for 1 year, $8 million, which is just incredible value. But some of the reports coming out were that the Ravens and the Chiefs offered short-term deals for around $10 million, $12 million, $13 million a year. The Eagles offered a lot more money than the Steelers ended up offering. So why sign for less money? Well, I've talked about this for quite some time, and the biggest reason really is just the salary cap. The salary cap is going to go back up, and I think the Steelers probably guaranteed Juju some sort of restructuring of his contract after this year. Well, his contract is a 1 year deal, but I think that the Steelers are going to offer him some sort of incentive and some sort of extra money in his next contract, because this contract now is dirt cheap. When the new salary cap comes out next season, this contract is going to be dirt cheap. They're going to be able to sign him for so much more money. And yeah, so I think Juju's taking advantage of what he can. I think he really wants to stay in Pittsburgh, and then I think that there's some sort of guaranteed for more money down the road from Pittsburgh. But I think a lot of a lot of what this has to do with is how Pittsburgh has treated its players in the past. Pittsburgh has always kind of held on to their franchise guys that have wanted to stick around, and they really welcome those type of players with open arms. When you look at guys like Hines Ward, who was there forever. You could talk about guys like Troy Polamalu, Big Ben, who they're going to keep trotting out there until Steelers fans just say no. Because, look, Pittsburgh, they've got a great football culture, great fans, and I think they really want Juju to stay in Pittsburgh for the foreseeable future. So I don't think Juju's going to go anywhere after next season. I think he's going to sign a monstrous extension depending on how he plays and how the season goes next year. But I'm really excited to see how Juju plays with Big Ben, but also interacts with a possible new quarterback that comes in, because the changing the guard has to happen soon at some point in Pittsburgh. So those are the two big names, the biggest names signed since I last talked to you guys last weekend. So Kenny Golladay goes to the New York Giants, and Juju Smith-Schuster goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Some other signings that happened throughout the week. Kyle Fuller, the former Bear, he went to the Denver Broncos on a 1-year, $9.5 million deal with $9 million guaranteed. This is a big loss for the Bears secondary. This immediately makes the Bears worse, and the Broncos gain an all-pro, Pro Bowl corner while doing so. I think the biggest reason why the Bears were okay with letting him walk after trying to offer him a huge pay cut, as it was reported, is because, look, he only had one interception last year. And at the cornerback position, if you're not picking off multiple balls a year, around 3, 4, 5, I don't think you're really a must to be paid, especially with a team like the Bears that needed to get under the salary cap. So he gets paired back with Vic Fangio. His last season, he played with Vic Fangio. I think it is worth noting that he had a career-high 7 interceptions in 2018 with the Bears. So whatever Vic Fangio was doing, he's one of the best defensive minds in the league. I think him and Kyle Fuller worked really well together. Kyle Fuller's kind of career got rejuvenized by Vic Fangio's presence in the Bears locker room. He kind of really challenged him throughout the years. And it was a real turning point, because that 2018 season, he was an all-pro. Like I said, he had a career-high 7 interceptions and was truly a number one lockdown corner. Last year is more the same, but just the interceptions were not there in Chuck Pagano's defense with the Bears. So I think this is a great signing by the Broncos. I think their defense is going to be absolutely terrifying next year. They're going to be good at all different levels. They just signed safety Justin Simmons, so the secondary is shored up. And I don't know. I think Vic Fangio knows how to play to Kyle Fuller's strengths. He's not really a press corner. He likes to play off, and he's also a really good tackler. So I think that's what Vic Fangio likes about him, and the Broncos are going to move forward with Kyle Fuller as their starting cornerback. The next signing I wanted to get into is Keanu Neal of the Cowboys. He signed a 1-year, $5 million deal with the Dallas Cowboys. He's going to help Jalen Smith in the linebacking core. There's some potential there because he is a former first-round pick from Atlanta. He had 100 tackles last season, but overall, I think the Cowboys are kind of taking a shot at a guy at this point. The Cowboys and Jerry Jones have loved to take a shot on former first-round picks, try to see if they can get any of that potential out of them. But Keanu Neal, I like this move for the Cowboys. They also signed D lineman Brent Urban from the Bears, who I thought was really productive or had a great production last season. So Keanu Neal, I think, will be a better complement to Jalen Smith than Leighton Vander Esch, who was pretty bad last year. The next signing I really liked was Carl Lawson to the Jets. Not many of you have probably heard of Carl Lawson, but he signed a 3-year, $45 million deal with $30 million guaranteed. He had 5.5 sacks last year for the Bengals. I think this guy can be a really productive starter in the NFL, and when he's getting teamed up with Robert Saleh, I think he can turn into a potential star for the Jets defense. And the Jets have really made a lot of moves on that defensive end, and I think that unit is going to be great just because Robert Saleh is one of the best defensive minds in football. He's one of the best young motivators in football. And Carl Lawson was on the show Good Morning Football yesterday, and he was just talking about how excited he is about being with the guys in that locker room now and being with Robert Saleh, because that was one of the big factors in his decision, was to go with that new Jets coach, Robert Saleh. So Carl Lawson to the Jets. I think I would keep an eye on him because I think he can be a future star in the NFL. Adoree Jackson signed with the Giants as well. 3 years, $39 million. That's a pretty monstrous deal for Adoree Jackson. He was released by the Titans. He will be paired alongside James Bradbury, who was a Pro Bowler last year. Bradbury was really impressive. He really kind of just came on. He was really physical, and I think Adoree Jackson kind of provides that great compliment to him, because Bradbury's that physical presence at corner, really likes to get into the receivers, and he will guard the number one. And now Adoree Jackson will have less on his plate. He's more of a speedy guy who can make plays in the secondary, and he's also a utility player because he has versatility as a return man. He's played some slot receiver in the NFL. Last season, he only played 3 games due to a knee injury, so let's see if that how the recovery process with that is going. But I think Adoree Jackson, the Giants needed to add another body on the secondary, and Adoree Jackson has some potential there, but they might have overpaid for him, for all I know. 3 years, $39 million for someone that was released by the Titans, I think is a lot, but overall, on paper, I think this fits well for the Giants defense and what Joe Judge is trying to do. The last signing, it's another defensive signing. Wow, all these other signings were all defense. So the Browns signed John Johnson, the safety. He signed 3 years, $33.75 million with $24 million guaranteed. He turned down substantially more money from the Rams to go to the Browns. I think that says a lot about the culture that the Browns are building, because that is just not something that would have happened in the league 3-4 years ago. Someone leaving the Rams and Sean McVay, turning down more money from them to go to the Browns. So I think that says a lot for Browns fans. And the Browns needed help at safety. That was probably their weakest unit on that defense last season, and they really needed help. And you saw them get exploited throughout the year just on a lot of deep coverage. They had Andrew Sendejo as one of their safeties. He really was just getting burnt a lot last year. If you remember that Monday Night Football game against the Ravens, Lamar Jackson was able to scramble out of the pocket and make big plays downfield, beat over the top of that defense. So I think John Johnson really kind of certifies that defense on all different levels. And now you have Denzel Ward in the secondary as a corner. You have John Johnson in the back end, and then Myles Garrett in the front end. So that Browns defense is only going to be improving as we move forward. So what value is still on the board? So much of the value is still on the board. I don't know. Some of it is probably fool's gold. There's a reason that some of these guys are still out there, but some of it, there's some real value out there. So I'm going to start with Alex Smith. I don't know. I really doubt that anyone signs Alex Smith, just because, I know for a fan how stressful it was just to watch him play, and you just saw he couldn't sustain the health on that leg, and he couldn't sustain the mobility. He really, towards the end of the season, he really just couldn't plant on it at all. And I don't think any team really wants to take a swing at him for around $8, $9, $10 million for one season. I do see him being a coach in the NFL, whether that's this year, next year, or a few years down the road, because I really think Alex Smith wants to play. That's just the competitor he is, and that's kind of a testament to his overall spirit as a football player. But any quarterback room should welcome his knowledge. I think if you are trying to bring in a young quarterback and you have Alex Smith in there, that's a huge plus. So Alex Smith is still on the board and still is available as a free agent. Leonard Fournette and Todd Gurley, a pair of running backs, are still available. Leonard Fournette was a star in the playoffs. I've talked about this the last 2 weeks. Led the Bucs in the running department when Ronald Jones went down towards the end of the year. Like I said, he was a star in the playoffs, and I think a team is getting a solid in-between the tackles runner with Leonard Fournette. And Todd Gurley's been on a steady decline since he signed that monstrous extension with the Los Angeles Rams. And I don't know, last season was not that great for him. Dealt with injuries, in and out of the lineup, but he still has some potential, and he's still Todd Gurley. So I think people in the league know what he can do, and he will be a late pick up as the offseason goes on. And I think one of the more important things is he needs an offensive line to go with him. So a pair of receivers I like that are still on the board, Antonio Brown and Sammy Watkins. Antonio Brown, although he was productive with Tom Brady in that offense last season, I think a lot of teams are still harping on those off-the-field concerns they have with him. And I think those are still looming over Antonio Brown because he had Tom Brady last year to kind of mentor him. I know for a point of the season he was living with Tom Brady. So although he had Tom Brady's leadership and guidance, and he really bought into that culture, and I think he wouldn't be an issue in a locker room with the right football culture now, I think too many teams are just weary of Antonio Brown getting in and messing everything up. And that's the biggest concern when it comes to him. But he did catch a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He's still Antonio Brown. He can run all the routes. Still has sure hands. He's not the same number one target that he once was until I see him playing alongside other receivers that aren't as good as him. But overall, I think Antonio Brown would be a good pickup for any team that needs receiver help. And Sammy Watkins, he's dealt with too many injuries. Probably on the back end of his career now, but the speed and ability still shows up on field when he's healthy, and the Chiefs let him go, so he is a free agent. A few pass rushers are on the board still, in Melvin Ingram and Jadeveon Clowney. They both have injury concerns. I'm really intrigued by Melvin Ingram. He's been really productive when he's opposite a solid pass rusher, and when he was alongside Joey Bosa in Los Angeles / San Diego, he was extremely productive. Melvin Ingram, I think a lot of teams could use him, and I think the Titans, if they wanted to take a swing at Melvin Ingram for a cheaper deal, pair him alongside Bud Dupree, that would immediately fix your pass rush issue, Mike Vrabel's pass rush issue, and that would really make that defense something to be feared. Jadeveon Clowney just did not produce for Tennessee last season. I think there's a chance he could be looking to prove something in the year 2021, but I don't know. It seems like there's an overall just lack of motivation there for Jadeveon Clowney, and we'll see what teams want him, but I don't know. He could end up going unclaimed when the free agency period is completely over. So let's move on. I'm going to get into my overall winners and losers of the free agency in terms of really filling needs and then adding overall talent, so I'm factoring all of those in. My first winner of free agency, these are not in any particular order, but my first winner of free agency is the Arizona Cardinals. So the Arizona Cardinals really went all in this offseason. I think they need to get into the playoffs. I think Cliff Kingsbury, their new head coach, knows they need to get into the playoffs. But they added A.J. Green, who I thought was an underrated signing. A lot of people think he's washed up, isn't the same A.J. Green, but I don't know. I wouldn't be too surprised if he starts flashing and making some incredible catches next year. They added J.J. Watt, which was a great signing. J.J. Watt still really is hungry for a Super Bowl, hungry for going to the playoffs even. And I think he'll be extra motivated to perform in Arizona. And then yesterday, they made a great signing in adding cornerback Malcolm Butler to replace Patrick Peterson. I think Malcolm Butler is definitely, at this moment in time, a better cornerback than Patrick Peterson. Although Malcolm Butler does tend to get burned quite a bit, he still has that Super Bowl experience. He's still a really good, solid cornerback in this league, and he's going to be a starter for the next 3, 4, 5 years. They also signed kicker Matt Prater from the Detroit Lions, who is one of the best kickers in the league. So they shored that problem up. The Cardinals have had kicking issues for the last few years, so that won't be an issue. And really, overall, they just replaced departures with both veteran and young talent. All their offseason acquisitions had an average age of 32, which is not that bad at all. And like I said, they need to get into the playoffs this year, so let's see how these new acquisitions fit into the team in Arizona. My next winner is the Giants. I've talked about both of their big signings already. They added Galladay. They added Adoree Jackson. They made aggressive moves. They re-signed Leonard Williams. They made aggressive moves, and really, I think they kind of put it all up to Danny Jones right now. And I think that's good because you really want to see a guy's full potential with a good supporting cast around him. And if you have these weapons that they put in place around Danny Jones, then you'll know for sure if he's the guy that you want to give an extension to or if he's a guy that you can let walk and try to move forward from. So the Giants, I like the way they went all in, although I don't know how well that'll work for them in 2021. I like the aggressive kind of mindset from Dave Gettleman, and I'm really excited to see that team in 2021. The Patriots, I took a deep dive into the Patriots spending spree last week. They spent more than anyone, improved all facets of their team, defense, secondary, wide receiver, and they have the most dominant tight end room by far in the NFL. So they got Cam weapons. They re-signed Cam Newton, and they got Matthew Judon, who I thought was a great signing. Jalen Mills, I think, could end up being really, really good for New England under Bill Belichick, and Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. So that tight end room is seriously the best in the NFL, I would argue. And they can still make noise in the draft. So they're in a good position right now where they can still make noise in the draft or through trades, whichever way Bill Belichick pleases. But I still think there are a lot of moves to be made left in New England. So some of my losers of free agency. The first I'm going to get into are the Raiders. They lost their starting guard, their starting tackle, and their starting center. That's a complete overhaul of the offensive line, especially when Derek Carr has consistently praised that offensive line. They've been known as one of the best units in the league for the past 2-3 years, and they completely dismantle it now. So I don't know what exactly went into those decisions. They also lost Nelson Aguilar, who had a breakout season for them. They replaced him with John Brown, who's somewhat of a similar player. But overall, I think Derek Carr is good enough to win a Super Bowl when I really think about it, but I just don't see the Raiders having the overall talent on their roster to do that. And it's both on the defensive side and now on the offensive side when, look, they still don't have a true number one wide receiver. You have a great tight end in Darren Waller, who's on a cheap deal. Some of the best value in the league right now is Darren Waller's contract with the Raiders. But you don't have a true number one wide receiver. And now that running game is likely going to take a step back with Josh Jacobs because of those offensive line departures. And overall, I just think John Gruden, he's proven that he's a great head coach in the NFL. He's a great motivator, great X's and O's guy. But overall, I don't know about his ability to analyze talent. And Mike Mayock, I think, kind of works with John Gruden a lot, and John Gruden has a lot to say in these decisions. But I just don't think the overall evaluation of talent is there for John Gruden, and I think he's kind of up and down on some of his decisions, and he's very impulsive in my mind. They also signed Kenyon Drake, which I did not like, and I talked about that last week. They added some defensive pieces, Yannick Ngakoue from the Vikings, I believe. But overall, I just don't think the talent is there for the Raiders. So, my next loser is the Falcons. They lost Keanu Neal. They lost center Alex Mack. Nothing really went on, but that's really kind of why they're one of my losers, is they just didn't do anything. And they restructured Matt Ryan's contract to kind of move out, clear up some space in the salary cap. So I thought a move was coming, but overall, they just were not aggressive at all, didn't do much, and they lost 2 starting players on their team. So the Falcons, I don't know if this is going to be another rebuild year for them. I still think Matt Ryan has a few good years left, but they really need that defense to kind of step up. And I'm excited to see them with Arthur Smith, the new head coach, the old Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator. My final loser of the free agency period is the Baltimore Ravens. They missed out on Juju, and overall, I think their number one goal going into this offseason was to find a wide receiver for Lamar Jackson because he really needed a reliable target. Until they get Lamar, that true number one option, I think that offense is just prone to being stopped in the playoffs. They still have a great team. They still have a great roster, but overall, when you don't have that number one reliable target, that safety net that quarterbacks need, then you're going to struggle. And Lamar Jackson right now, his best receiver is Marquise Brown, who I think is a very, very good number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. But at the end of the day, he's not a true number one. He's a shorter guy really speedy, can take the top off your defense, but they need that number one wide receiver. Juju, I thought, would have been great for Lamar, but Juju obviously turned the division rival down. So the Ravens, they didn't do much. They also lost Matthew Judon to the Patriots. So let's see what the Ravens do in the draft or what kind of trades they can make for a wide receiver, because they really need one. So that should be the last time I kind of dive deep into free agency until the draft comes in April, but I hope I covered all the big news and storylines. That was a lot of fun for me. Now I'm going to once again get into some quarterback news. The biggest being the developing story of the Saints giving Jameis Winston the keys to the offense. That and more information surrounding the draft quarterback prospects coming. But first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Again, this is Wyatt Krieger. You're listening to the GSMC Football Podcast. I'll be right back.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, I am now going to get into my second segment of the day. Before I do that, as always, this is Wyatt Krieger. I wanted to remind you guys to follow us at GSMC_football on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook. You can find our podcast anywhere you can listen to podcasts, and we would really appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, downloaded the episode, and left a review. So my next segment of discussion, I had a lot of fun kind of thinking about where to go with this topic, and this topic is covering the New Orleans Saints and Jameis Winston. So reports came this week that the Jameis Winston era is likely to begin in New Orleans as he is likely to be their starter in 2021. This coming after Drew Brees retired a few months after the season. He is likely going to take an analyst job at NBC. But what a run for Drew Brees in New Orleans. It caps off a historic run. Everything he did, winning a Super Bowl after Hurricane Katrina. I mean, he's a hero in that city forever, and it's pretty crazy how sports can kind of do that to some figures, and he truly is a hero to that city. He has the most consecutive 20 completion games, currently leads all-time passing yards of all quarterbacks in NFL history, and was the first ever to reach 80K yards, although Tom Brady is likely to surpass that. Surefire Hall of Famer, one of the best quarterbacks to ever do it. And in a recent interview, Drew Brees said he was really excited for the opportunity that both Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston have, and he praised the quarterback room's competitiveness and work ethic throughout the year. So now, the Saints have some big shoes to fill in Drew Brees. So it looks like they're going to go with Jameis Winston right now. They're also going to keep Taysom Hill, as I mentioned last week, but both got action last season. Jameis, not really much at all, only threw 11 passes, but Taysom Hill started 8 games while Drew Brees dealt with a rib injury. So, like I said, the reports coming out are that Jameis is going to take the starting role, as opposed to last year where Taysom Hill was handed the keys to the offense. But really, it's going to be really interesting to see how Sean Payton manages these two. And I think that decision-making process for Sean Payton is going to be pivotal for the Saints' future of success. So, last year, Taysom Hill was the guy when Drew Brees got hurt, and it wasn't Jameis Winston. That was a surprise to me, just because I think everyone who followed the NFL knew Taysom Hill was going to be limited as a quarterback. But I think that's a testament to how good Sean Payton is as an offensive mastermind. They were able to win games with Taysom Hill as their starter. But he's the former BYU quarterback. He's a true do-it-all utility type player. He's played quarterback, he's played running back, he's played wide receiver, he's played some tight end, and he always contributes on special teams. So I think that's really what the Saints love the most about him, is that he's always willing to do anything on the field. So he had his first opportunity to start in 4 games in 2020. He had 3 wins against 3 bad teams. 2 of them came against the Falcons, and 1 against the Broncos when they had a COVID outbreak and did not have a starting quarterback. And then they lost to the Eagles. So those were Taysom Hill's starts. He completed 72% of his passes, threw for 928 yards, had 4 passing touchdowns and 2 interceptions, but he was also a really good threat on the ground. He had almost 500 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. But it was clear that teams caught on. He was clearly limited as a passer, and the Saints needed to get Drew Brees back before the postseason started if they wanted to have any chance in the postseason. I think he likely was given the starting job because the Saints didn't know what to expect from Jameis, and without having the full offseason because of COVID, that I think Jameis wasn't fully familiar with the offense. But overall, the Saints like what Taysom Hill provides. I think they need to find a true downfield passing quarterback, and that's what Jameis Winston can be, because Taysom Hill, he is a great athlete, great threat on the ground, like I mentioned, but he's truly limited as a passer, and that showed later in the year when teams kind of sat back, kept everything in front of them, and tried to stop his effect from the ground, and really he couldn't make the consistent throws that you need starting NFL quarterbacks to make down the field. But he does have a really strong arm. I thought some of the ways Sean Payton used him last year was kind of confusing. I think he tries to force the issue a lot of the times, bringing him in on the goal line when they have Alvin Kamara, just to try to mix things up, running trick plays. Against the Bears, they tried to run a trick play with Taysom Hill throwing the ball, and it ended up being a fumble or an interception. So stuff like that I get worried about with Sean Payton, because I think he's trying to outsmarts himself in a way in trying to use Taysom Hill. But overall, I'm really excited to see Jameis Winston at the starting quarterback role. So Jameis Winston only completed 7 of 11 passes for 75 yards during the 2020 regular season for the Saints. But he also threw a 56-yard touchdown pass on a trick play in the playoffs. And that was a great pass, might I add. But that was really all we got to saw. So I don't know if there's any real expectations people can have for what to expect from Jameis, because it's just a limited sample size, and it's been so long since we've seen him play starting quarterback. I think one of the biggest storylines going into his final season, or his first season with the Saints, was that he got LASIK eye surgery. So that could kind of lead to his growth as a quarterback. I don't know. I think I'm half joking, half not when I say that. But I think the internet had a lot of fun with that when Jameis finally got his LASIK surgery, and people were like, okay, he's going to be able to read defenses perfectly now. He's going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback. But the Saints last year overall as a team, the Saints are always going to be competitive because, like I said, they have one of the best coaches in the NFL in Sean Payton. They went 12-4 last year, lost to the Buccaneers in the divisional round. They're still one of the more complete teams in the NFL. They have a star running back, one of the only running backs I would pay big money in, Alvin Kamara. They have a top 5, top 7, top 8 wide receiver in Michael Thomas. They're solid on both fronts, both the offensive and defensive line, and they have one of the league's best cornerbacks in Marcus Lattimore. So one of the most complete teams in the NFL. If they can just get a little more out of that quarterback position than what Drew Brees was providing, then I think they can be far better, because no matter how good Drew Brees was, or towards the end of his career, he could still make all of the short throws. He could still read defenses better than any quarterback in the NFL, I would argue. And he still had that beautiful touch on his passes, but the arm strength was just not there, and it was dying. And Jameis has that arm strength. So is Jameis the guy to kind of lead this team to the promised land? I'm not sure. So I'm going to get into some reasons why Jameis Winston will work in New Orleans, and then kind of offer the other side as to why it won't. So here's to why it will, which is what I kind of truly believe will happen. I think Jameis Winston will work. I think they will make the playoffs this year. Here's why. Jameis Winston had a full year under Drew Brees to learn, kind of mature as a quarterback, improve, feed off that knowledge from both Sean Payton, Drew Brees, and Taysom Hill. His biggest issue has always been interceptions, and I think that's why he's kind of one of the more polarizing quarterbacks in the NFL. He had 88 interceptions from 2015 to 2019. Like I said before, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, he got LASIK eye surgery last year. Who knows how that will play into his role as a starting quarterback? If he'll be able to see those linebackers coming across the middle, I don't know. But I don't think it could hurt. He still, although the interceptions were a problem, he still piled up yards. He still threw touchdowns, and he still kind of displayed his overall arm talent on the Buccaneers. He led the league in passing yards in his 5th season, his last year with the Buccaneers, but had an NFL record 30 interceptions in the season. So it's a lot of give and take right now with Jameis Winston. He couldn't fully read defenses. He couldn't see linebackers coming across the middle. That was the biggest issue. But I think learning under Drew Brees can surely help cut that out of his game. Just because Drew Brees is one of the smartest, most intelligent quarterbacks. And I think all the things that he taught him about reading coverages and notifying where players are on the field had to have helped Jameis throughout last season. And the other thing, like I said, Sean Payton, he's a great coach. And it's going to be up to him to kind of designing an offense that Jameis Winston can thrive in and really be his true self while honing in on all those mistakes and interceptions and turnovers. But Jameis Winston can make all the throws. If Sean Payton can kind of make reads a little simpler, and the fact that they have all those weapons is huge. Having that offensive line and having that rushing attack takes so much pressure off the quarterback. And really, if Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, and that offensive line hold up, those are much better conditions than he really ever had in Tampa. Although he had the receiving threats in Mike Thomas and Chris Godwin, he really has not had a true or skill players this talented as Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, and that offensive line is seriously, seriously good. So here's why I don't think Jameis will work in New Orleans. The main reason is just we haven't seen it yet. We have no idea what to expect. I still thought it was alarming that he wasn't able to earn the starting job over Taysom Hill last year. And overall, that kind of puts a lot of things up into the air as to who will start this year. Just because you don't know with Sean Payton, you don't know what he's thinking. But I'm excited to see more of him. Off-the-field issues have always plagued him. They plagued him in college. He got suspended a few times, made a lot of mistakes in college, and even in the NFL, there were off-season issues. He assaulted a Uber driver a few years ago. Those are things you just can't ignore, and I do think Jameis Winston has matured since then, but overall, I think NFL teams can't ignore those off the field mistakes, and those can always lead to issues on the field as well. But if Winston cuts down on interceptions, the Saints can kind of have that down the field passing attack that they haven't had with the last few years of Drew Brees. So overall, I think it'll work. There are concerns of Jameis Winston that I would be kind of take note of if I were a Saints fan, but Saints are in a tough spot. They've had a tough few losses in the playoffs the last 4 years, including 3-4 years ago. They had back-to-back years in the playoffs. They had the Minneapolis Miracle with Case Keenum and Stephon Diggs, one of the more memorable playoff blunders in the history of the sport. And then they had the missed pass interference call against the Rams. Still to this day, do not know how they didn't see that call. Completely took the game away from them. And so those are two losses that I think if you just look at two losses, 2 plays in 2 different games that completely changed their season and ended their seasons subsequently. So if Jameis doesn't really get the Saints over that hump, I think they could be looking for the next Drew Brees after 2021. So that is for sure going to be something to watch as training camp starts with Jameis' development, kind of see if they have any bit of a quarterback competition. But I don't think the Saints can afford to try to target a quarterback in the draft. I think they have a lot more positions that they want to fill for the long term and give cheaper deals to. But overall, I'm excited for the Jameis Winston era to start in New Orleans, and I really just can't wait to see what Sean Payton comes up with this year. Before I get into my next segment, here's a word from our sponsors. Again, I'm Wyatt Krieger, and you are listening to the GSMC Football Broadcast Podcast presented by the Golden State Media Concepts. Be back in a few.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Again, I'm Wyatt Krieger, your host for today's episode. I'm going to get into my third topic of discussion, and that is the 2021 NFL Draft. As always, be sure to follow us on social media, on Twitter, at GSMC_football. We're posting a lot of reactions to different news around the league, trying to keep everyone up to date on everything going on. And you can listen to our podcast anywhere on Spotify, Apple Play, Google Play, anywhere you can listen to podcasts. And as always, go to gsmcpodcast.com for more information or to listen to any of our episodes. So, the 2021 NFL Draft. I've covered the top 4 quarterbacks in detail. And this is obviously an objective opinion because Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and Trey Lance are my top 4 guys. Those aren't everyone's top 4 guys, but all I know about studying this year's draft is that the teams that want quarterbacks are going to be really aggressive, and they're going to be gone early. So it's pretty much expected that the top 4 quarterbacks that I just mentioned could be gone in the top 10 picks. Now, there is some debate, I would say, about Trey Lance. Some would kind of put in Mac Jones in that area, but I think Lance offers a lot more upside overall. Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, that's pretty much consensus, but those are my 4 quarterbacks: Lawrence, Fields, Wilson, and Lance. So I'm going to get into the other quarterbacks, the quarterbacks that could go later in the first round, in the second round, in the third round. Because overall, I think it's smart for teams to draft a quarterback in every draft, no matter what, at any point. So I'm going to get into which teams are going to be looking to improve the quarterback position in the draft and what guys they might have to settle for if they cannot move ahead and grab one of those top prospects. So first, I'm going to get into what college players are showing out in Pro Day, because it's Pro Day season. And this is when teams can visit college campuses as players kind of showcase a combine so teams can get an up-close look at prospects. Remember, some of these guys haven't played football in over 2 years now because of COVID opt-outs. So I think any sort of evaluation, any chance teams can get to look get an up-close look at what these guys can do is overall huge. So these pro days were filled with scouts, filled with NFL coaches, and I have some highlights from this week's pro days so far. Mac Jones, the Alabama quarterback, he really impressed with his arm strength at Alabama's pro day. Devontae Smith also weighed in at 170 pounds. He said he's not going to change. He's not going to try to add a substantial amount of weight, which I think some scouts are really concerned with, playing wide receiver at 170 pounds in the NFL. Some other news, Kyle Pitts, one of my favorite prospects, the Florida tight end, ran an unofficial 4.46, which is absolutely absurd for someone at his position and with his size. So that guy continues to move up my draft board. I think he's a unicorn, as you would say, in the football world, because just of how many different things he can do, his rare athleticism and his rare just given talent. Micah Parsons, the number one projected linebacker to go off the board, ran a 4.39 40-yard dash at 6'3", 250 pounds. Wow. I thought that was absurd. Just running that fast, 4.39. Some of the fastest wide receivers have run high 4.2s in the 4.2 range, 4.3 range, and he's running a 4.39 at 6'3", 250 pounds. Micah Parsons, I love the linebacker out of Penn State. I think some team will be getting a stud in Micah Parsons no matter where they draft him. Rondale Moore, he's a projected late first-round pick, early second. The Purdue wide receiver, I think he could climb up a lot of guys' draft boards with the combine in his pro day, because the Purdue wide receiver, he's 5'7", not the biggest, but he showed an ability to be an absolute playmaker in the Big Ten for Purdue. And get this, at his pro day this week, he ran a 4.29 unofficial 40. Just blazing speed from Rondale Moore. I think he is going to be a huge acquisition in this draft, no matter who gets him, just because of his overall ability to just bust a play open and really kind of change the course of a game with his abilities and his speed, his athleticism, and his overall just agility and quickness too. So outside of the top four quarterbacks, who else is there? So I'm going to talk about the rest of the quarterbacks in the draft. There's always diamonds in the rough. I think we get caught up in who's the best prospect, who has the most potential, who has the most upside, when really so much more matters. Of what matters is the team and the team around this guy, who they're drafting, and the coaching. What kind of development is this quarterback going through? Because overall, I know quarterback is the most important position of all the sports, and it's the hardest position to obtain, but that's kind of why I think it's important to draft a quarterback every year in the draft, at any sort of round, at any level of the draft. But overall, it's the team around him. So some of these teams, like I'm thinking of the Dolphins, that have really solid infrastructures around. They have a solid head coach. Everything else is in place. Although they have Tua, I'm not discounting Tua. They're still going to go with Tua. I really think that. But you have a team like the Dolphins. I think it'd be smart for them to take quarterback, because you get a quarterback in the late second, third, fourth round that comes in and is able to develop really, really well with those weapons and in that culture, in that football culture. Then you could have a star. And no matter what you think you have with Tua, I think it's worth taking a shot at. So that was just an example, but it's the most important position in all of sports, and overall, the whole team around the quarterback matters so much more than anything else. So here are some of the quarterback prospects that I really like heading into 2021 that are not Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, or Trevor Lawrence. So my first, this guy could go much earlier than I expect, but it's Mac Jones, the quarterback from Alabama. He won a lot of games, put up a lot of stats, had an historic year on offense with Najee Harris and Devontae Smith and all those receivers, Jalen Waddle, all those receivers that they had, all the weapons. He's a really smart quarterback. I don't think the competition is an issue, because look, he threw for over 400 yards against a really solid Georgia defense with a ton of pros. He makes good decisions. His arm is strong, and he's pretty accurate. I think some of the concerns about Mac Jones are just the overall talent around him that he had on Alabama. is concerning just because all of those guys, whether you talk about the offensive line, the running backs, the receivers, they were all just on a completely different level than the rest of the competition. So I don't know. I don't want to say it was easy to put up the numbers that he did because the numbers were truly impressive and how efficient he was truly impressive at Alabama. But I think those concerns are legit because you have a guy with all this talent around him and you don't know how he's going to fare in the NFL when the playing field is overall just leveled. So he doesn't have as much upside as some of these other guys like Trey Lance, but he is being graded a first round pick. I've seen some have him fall to the second. I don't think he'll get there. I think he'll go in the 16 to 25 draft range in the first round. But overall, not as much upside. But I think if you put a good team around him, like New England, like Chicago, I think you could have a really good quarterback in Mac Jones if you develop him the right way. I said Chicago, and just in terms of he has weapons, a strong defense. So I really would like to see the Bears take a swing on that, but I'll get into that later. The next quarterback I want to get into is Kellen Mond, the Texas A&M starting QB. He's really started to kind of fly up people's draft boards as of late. I think what really intrigues people is his overall size and athleticism. He's 6'4", 225 pounds, and last year he only lost one game in the tough SEC conference. So I think that's overall really impressive just looking at it, taking a step back and looking at it. He had 19 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Overall, his main concerns, I think, from scouts are his accuracy, but he's athletic. He has a really strong arm, and I've seen a lot of comparisons just watching the film. He's I really compare him to Colin Kaepernick because of just that strong arm, that unique athletic ability, and I think Kellen Mond could be a early second, late second, early third round absolute steal in the draft. The next quarterback I want to take a deeper look at is Davis Mills from Stanford. He had a really strong pro day, was in the rain. I think a lot of coaches like what they saw out of him at that pro day, just the overall arm talent and ability. But the sample size is just not there, like there is with a lot of these guys in this draft. But he only played 4 games in 2020, 65% completion percentage, only 4 touchdowns, not much experience. But I think the upside is here in Davis Mills. There's a lot of upside. There's a lot of buzz kind of around what he could be or what he projects to be as a quarterback, but it's kind of similar to a Mitch Trubisky scenario coming out of college where just not that much experience, not that many games under his belt, so you really just don't know what to expect. The last quarterback I'm going to take a look at is Kyle Trask, the Florida quarterback. He really came on in 2020. He had 4,300 yards, completed almost 70% of his passes, and had 43 touchdowns. So he had some really good performances. Like in the SEC Championship against Alabama, he played exceptionally well, was making all the throws that need to be made. But then you look at their bowl game against Oklahoma, and he looked really bad. So, I don't know. The consistency is somewhat concerning. The overall mobility and athletic ability, or the overall mobility and athleticism is definitely concerning. But he has good size, and I think he's projected as a true pocket passer in the league. So you're going to need a team with that kind of offense to suit Kyle Trask. So now I'm going to get into some of the teams that I think are really going to be targeting quarterbacks in this draft at any point. And I'm going to kind of look at how aggressive I think they'll be and why they need to target a quarterback in this draft. So the first team I'm going to look at is the 49ers because they're in somewhat of a weird position with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think the coaches love Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a really likable guy. The teammates love him. One of the leaders on the team, George Kittle, has always voiced his opinions on Jimmy Garoppolo, how much he loves him. And I think really they kind of have to balance that love for who Jimmy Garoppolo is and his limitations on the football field, because in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, his limitations truly showed. And they were good enough to get to that point, but kind of similar to the Rams making it into the Super Bowl with Jared Goff, I don't know if he's good enough to win you that big game. And I really don't. And I don't know if he's good enough to consistently get you to that point at all either, because At the end of the day, I think Kyle Shanahan really wants to improve that position. I think he's done dealing with just mediocre quarterback play, which is what he's getting from Jimmy Garoppolo. But I do think that they're going to go into next year with him as the starter, but I really do. I'd be surprised if they didn't target someone in this draft. So they were 6-10 last year. Were hit with injuries more than any other team, but they have the foundation. They have the football culture. They were competing in games that they really shouldn't have from a talent level perspective, and everything's there. So they lose Robert Saleh, which I think is an issue on the defensive side of the ball, but Kyle Shanahan is still, I think he's one of the best offensive minds in the NFL, just in terms from a running the ball standpoint overall, and just as a true leader and head coach, he's one of the best in the league. So I see them being aggressive in this draft. I see them trading up for their guy, and if they do end up trading up, I think it's to go after Justin Fields. So that's going to have to be really early in the draft. You're going to have to give up some capital, maybe some players, maybe even Jimmy Garoppolo in that deal if you want to make that. But I see them going after Justin Fields. I really think Kyle Shanahan wants a mobile threat at quarterback. Now, if they stay put at 12, which is where they're picking in this draft, I could see them in somewhat of a trade back scenario. And if Kyle Shanahan really likes what Kellen Mond projects to be the Texas A&M quarterback, then I could see him falling to them. And Kyle Shanahan would be really happy with that without having to risk too much draft capital. So I think Shanahan wants a mobile threat quarterback, and I think that's a position that he really wants to improve in 2021. The next team, I talked about them last week. It's the Chicago Bears. So here's really why I think the Bears are going to target a quarterback in this draft. So earlier this week, the Bears' social media, or the Bears' Twitter account, posted a tweet of Andy Dalton photoshopped into a Bears jersey, and the caption was QB1. Now, I kind of want to cut these social media managers, the people running the social media department for the Chicago Bears, because it's the offseason. They have to put something out there. But I don't know. It just seemed tone deaf, and they really got a lot of hate on the internet from their fans for posting that photo of Andy Dalton and saying QB1, because it just is like, it's just demoralizing, I think, when Bears fans see that, and they're just like, I don't know how you can really get excited to watch that team when you're hyping up Andy Dalton as your quarterback one. But anyways, I digress from that. Enough talking about Andy Dalton. Here's why I think the Bears will draft a quarterback in this draft, and I think that it'll be early. So Adam Hogue, a beat reporter for the Bears that I constantly listen to, he really brought up an interesting point about Matt Nagy. So in 2017, when Matt Nagy was the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs, Alex Smith had a breakout year. He had a breakout year while Patrick Mahomes sat under him. He threw down the field more than ever. In the season before, the Chiefs couldn't throw the ball downfield at all, and that was kind of what Alex Smith was known for, is not being able to push the ball down the field. But they drafted Patrick Mahomes in 2017, and they let him sit behind Alex Smith while he had one of his best seasons, and they really let him push the ball down the field, and he still was able to limit turnovers somehow. So that was one of Alex Smith's best career years in the NFL. I think that played a huge role into why Matt Nagy was such a popular head coaching candidate in that offseason. But they lose in the playoffs to the Titans in the first round. Although they lost, I think Mahomes' development had to be aided by the year Alex Smith had and the performances he was putting on week in and week out and everything he learned from that season. And like I said, Matt Nagy was the Chiefs' offensive coordinator. So the Bears this year have the chance to kind of do the exact same thing. Now, although Andy Dalton is no Alex Smith, I don't think they're too far off. And that's why I can't see the Bears not taking a swing. I can't see the Bears not taking a swing at quarterback at the 20th pick or at 42, because past experiences matter. And Matt Nagy was the offensive coordinator in Kansas City. He saw how it played out with Patrick Mahomes. If this is the option they're going to go with, Andy Dalton, they have to have this sort of long-term deal in place, because I think they can target Mac Jones at that 20th pick. I think they can trade up. But overall, if Ryan Pace has a guy in mind, if Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace have a guy they really like, whether it's Mac Jones, Trey Lance, one of the top prospects or one of the lesser prospects, they will move up and do everything they can to get him. So overall, this decision could end up saving their jobs if the QB is good enough to beat out Andy Dalton or take his job during the season. But we're talking about a lot of what-ifs here, and the Bears have a lot of decisions to make. I do think that the past experiences in 2017 that Matt Nagy had, I think those definitely matter. And overall, if the Bears don't draft a quarterback in the 2021 draft, that would just be foolish and kind of a laugh in the face to Bears fans. The next team I want to get into is the Washington football team. I talked last week how they signed Fitzmagic, Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's going to be a fun year for Washington football team fans. I think they're really going to be a fun team to watch. They're going to be competitive in every game. But overall, they still need a long-term solution at quarterback. And can you really trust Dan Snyder, one of the worst owners in the NFL, to kind of make that decision? Because he's swung and missed as much as anyone at the quarterback position as their owner. And he's really, like I said, he's a hands-on type of owner. He doesn't really let the GM do his job. But it seemed like there was somewhat of a change in that last year. But that's also some other news I wanted to get into, is that Dan Snyder bought out minority ownership in the football team, which a lot expected the opposite to happen. But nonetheless, the football team had a great year. They have that veteran leader in Ron Rivera as their head coach, Riverboat Ron, as I like to call him. So hopefully Ron Rivera has a quarterback that he has his eye on, that he really likes. And it's kind of similar to the Bears, is that this quarterback will have a great chance to develop under Ryan Fitzpatrick, which is what those kind of middle-of-the-road quarterbacks do. So they're picking at 19 right now. I don't see them trading up. I would see them targeting Kyle Trask late, because he kind of seems to fit the pocket passing style of offense that they want to run, running the football, play action, and then just pocket passing, getting it to those skill position players in Curtis Samuel and Terry McLaurin. So Kyle Trask, I think, could be a good fit in the second round. But also I could see them not taking a quarterback because of who they have in the room right now. They have Ryan Fitzpatrick. They re-signed Taylor Heineke. They have Kyle Allen, who for some reason they really seem to think is has potential as a backup. But overall, I think football team fans want to see them take a swing at quarterback just to kind of provide that hope, because at the end of the day, if you draft a quarterback, you kind of have that sliver of hope, no matter who it is, that, hey, this guy could be the guy. So the Washington football team, I think they're going to be aggressive. I think they're going to take a quarterback. I don't know how. I don't think they'll be aggressive, but I think they'll kind of let things play out and really be decisive with this quarterback move, because I think they have a lot of guys on their board, and a lot of different guys could fit in that system and kind of fit that mold to develop under Ryan Fitzpatrick. So the last team I wanted to talk about is the Denver Broncos. So John Elway, he really has just been unable to get the quarterback situation right in Denver, because Peyton Manning came in towards the end of his career. He had some great seasons, but his play really started to decline, similar to Drew Brees' play. I would say even worse with Peyton Manning, just because of the injuries, all the injuries and surgeries he had. He really just could not push the ball down the field at all. But other than him, on John Elway's resume as the Broncos GM, although he kind of pushed some of those GM duties aside this offseason, he's still going to have a say in the decision. So other than him, you have Brock Osweiler, Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, and now Drew Lock as the quarterbacks to come through Denver. None of those are really pleasing options to look at if you're a Broncos fan. But that's kind of really why I think John Elway is really going to try to get this quarterback situation right. I could see them draft a quarterback at 9. I think Trey Lance is really intriguing to John Elway. I think he has that big arm and that athleticism that he kind of sees in himself as a former player. And overall, if they think they really have something in Drew Lock, then they won't take a quarterback at 9, and they'll try to take a different position player, whether it's Kyle Pitts or Micah Parsons, the Penn State linebacker. If that is the case, if they believe in Drew Lock, but I don't really see it. I think they've seen the absolute potential. He's shown some flashes, but just no overall consistency in his game. So that defense is going to be great next year. They need to get that quarterback position right. So I would really like to see them target Trey Lance in the draft. And really, I think at number 9, they have a great spot to be in. If they want the quarterback, they have a chance to get any of those top 4 guys. And if they don't, they'll be able to trade for a lot of picks if they don't end up trying to take a quarterback at that spot and someone else wants to. So now that I've covered the draft, I've covered the quarterback prospects, which leads to the most intrigue in the draft right now is just the quarterbacks because all the other dominoes seemingly kind of fall after them. But I'm now going to get into a few segments that I'll develop throughout the offseason, just with not as much news going on in the summer. I'm going to kind of start some new segments, if you will. So I'm going to get into that. But first, we have a quick commercial break. This is Wyatt Krieger talking. You're listening to the GSMC Football Podcast. I'll be back after this commercial break. Thank you.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. I'm your host, Wyatt Krieger. As always, be sure to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football, on Facebook, and be sure to like, download, subscribe, leave a review for any of our episodes. I would really appreciate it, and we appreciate all of the listeners, as always. I've got a lot to talk about in my fourth and final kind of segment of today. I've got some off-season fun. I'm going to power rank the top 4 divisions in the NFL. I'm going to give a 2021 season preview. So each week I'm going to preview a team for the 2021 season. This week it is going to be the Browns. I obviously might not do this some weeks when there's more news like pertaining to the draft or off-season signings, but I'm going to give a 2021 Browns season preview, and I'm also going to get into an update on Deshaun Watson. So let's get to it. Let's have some fun. First, I'm going to power rank my top 4 divisions in the NFL. So my first division, the number 1 overall, is the NFC West. So the NFC West is the Seattle Seahawks, the Arizona Cardinals, the Los Angeles Rams, and the San Francisco 49ers. I think this is the best division top to bottom. It's one of the few divisions where I can see any team winning it going into the 2021 year. The Seahawks were the division winners last year at 12-4. The Rams were second at 10-6, and they knocked Seattle out of the playoffs in the first round. The Cardinals and the 49ers are also there. They beat up on each other throughout the year. The Cardinals had a promising start to the year and kind of lost some crucial games late, and the 49ers, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, were dealing with injuries to all positions throughout the year. So here's kind of where I project them to finish in 2021. The Seattle Seahawks, I project them to finish last. And I know that might be a hot take, but I think the Russell Wilson issues this offseason can't be understated. I know Russell Wilson's a great guy and a great teammate and a great team player, but I can't see these offseason issues not having an effect on the team this year, just because Russell Wilson still needs to be protected, still needs that offensive line, and it seems like Pete Carroll and the Seattle coaching staff does not want to let him cook, so to speak, to the way he wants to. So I think that's going to be a conflict throughout the year. Overall, I don't trust that their defense compared to the Rams and the 49ers, but they have the best quarterback in the division by far, so I can't count them out. So the Seahawks, I projected them to finish last, but again, this division, I can see any team winning. the Los Angeles Rams, I project them to finish first in this division, solely because they added Matt Stafford. It's an immediate upgrade, and then if the defense can be anywhere close to where they were in 2020, I think they're going to be that much better. They already beat the Seahawks going with two different quarterbacks in Jared Goff and Wolfson. So I don't like. There has to be improvement there with Matt Stafford. There has to be some improvement just because he is better than Jared Goff, and I think that defense with the stars they have in Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, if Matt Stafford can just get a little bit more out of the quarterback position than what Jared Goff is doing, then the Rams are going to be as tough an opponent as they come this year. So the 49ers, I project them to finish third in this division. I think Kyle Shanahan bounces back in a big way. They lose defensive coordinator Robert Saleh, which I think is a big issue, but this all depends on the QB situation. I already think they're going to target someone in the draft, but even then, the last time they had Garoppolo healthy for a full season, they made it to the Super Bowl. So I can't disagree with the sample size and what I've been shown so far from Kyle Shanahan coached 49ers teams, but I do expect them to make moves at quarterback. Either way, they're going to be a tough opponent, and they're never easy to beat. And the Arizona Cardinals, they were one of my free agency winners in this offseason. I think Kyler Murray is going to take the next step with these extra weapons around him, with that defense being much better with J.J. Watt. If the Cardinals don't make the playoffs this year, Cliff Kingsbury could very well be on the hot seat. So I think they're going to be playing for their coach, playing for Kyler Murray, and I think they can finish second in this division and squeak into the playoffs. My next best division that I'm going to power rank is the AFC North. That is the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Baltimore Ravens, the Cleveland Browns, and the Cincinnati Bengals. So this division, I could see 3 out of 4 teams winning. I think the Bengals are kind of the outlier, but I really do think Joe Burrow is an absolute stud, and he's going to win a lot of football games in the future. But overall, the Browns, Steelers, and Ravens combined for a 34-14 record in 2020, which is absolutely absurd. Great defenses across the board. There's always bad blood in that division, so it always leads to excellent football, excellent drama. No matter who's playing, even if the Bengals are playing the Steelers, there's always going to be bad blood between those teams. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, I project them to finish third in 2021 in the AFC North. Ultimately, I don't trust Big Ben to be that efficient, and they were kind of exposed down the stretch of last year after starting 11-0. They were blown out by the Browns in the playoffs. They lose Bud Dupree this offseason, so the defense will be slightly worse. And I just don't think there will be too many improvements on offense for them to finish above third in this division. The Baltimore Ravens, I project to finish second. They still have the best quarterback in the division, but they do need to get a receiver. Nonetheless, Lamar Jackson is going to be able to win you a lot of games throughout the season with his rushing ability and passing ability as an overall quarterback. The defense is still solid at all levels. They have one of the best secondaries in the league with Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, and Chuck Clark at safety. Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey at corner. So the Ravens are still going to be good. The Browns, I project them to finish first. They're the most complete team in this division in my eyes. I think Baker takes the next step. They had a solid offseason, and they really could have beat the Chiefs last year. It came down to a few plays, although the score doesn't necessarily depict that. But if the refs make a different call on that fumble into the end zone, I think that game is completely different. The Browns easily could have left Kansas City with a win, and I think they're going to be hungry and ready to take a win, take the division this year. So the Bengals, I project them to finish last, more of the same. This is a really important year for Zach Taylor, kind of as far as how the team plays and how they compete in games, but they have a lot of holes they need to fill. They need to shore up their protection. They need to add a few weapons. They need to shore up that protection, like I said, for Joe Burrow. Add a few weapons, make sure Joe Burrow doesn't get hurt. And I still love what Burrow brings, everything he will become. And I think he's going to be able to win some games in this division no matter what, just because of his overall talent level. So the Cincinnati Bengals last. I have the Browns first, Ravens second, and the Steelers third in that division. But that's the second best division in my eyes in the NFL. The third might come as a surprise to some of you, but it's the AFC East. And that is the division with the Buffalo Bills, the New England Patriots, the Miami Dolphins, and the New York Jets. So top to bottom, I really think this is the best coached division in football. It has been run by the Patriots for the last 2 decades, but the playing field is definitely leveling with the rise of the Buffalo Bills, because Doug McDermott is one of the best coaches in the NFL. Bill Belichick is the best coach in the NFL. Brian Flores of the Dolphins is young and promising. Robert Saleh, the new Jets coach, is just a favorite around the league. I've talked about him at length throughout my first 3 episodes here with GSMC. So overall, top to bottom, I think this is the best coach division in football. So they were led by the Dolphins and Bills last year. The Dolphins went 10-6. The Bills went 11-5 to win the division. But I see a lot of improvement coming from the bottom half in the Patriots and the Jets. So the Bills, I project to be first. They're my early Super Bowl pick, I would say, along with the Chiefs. I think they have the best quarterback in the division by far in Josh Allen. Sean McDermott is a great coach, and he really has built a relationship with the Buffalo Bills DGM where they're kind of arm in arm in all the decisions they're making, and that's where you want to be with in terms of your front office head coach relationship. So I think they're going to be really good for the next 5-10 years with McDermott at the helm. But overall, they have the best quarterback. They had a solid offseason. They brought in Emmanuel Sanders, and I think they'll just keep improving as Josh Allen continues to improve. And don't discredit the backup quarterback situation they have in Buffalo, because they arguably have one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL in Mitchell Trubisky. I will argue that. And I think his development this offseason under Bill's offensive coordinator is going to be huge. So if Josh Allen gets hurt, he's a mobile quarterback, he gets hit. Don't be surprised if Mitch Trubisky comes in and lights it up for a few games. That's all I'm going to say. New England Patriots, I project to finish second. I think Bill Belichick has something to prove, which should be scary to all other teams in this division. I think Cam comes back, and if they have talent on defense, teams won't be able to score against them because Bill Belichick is just a mastermind on that end. So I have the Patriots projected to win to be second in that division. I project the Dolphins to be third. I don't really trust Tua yet, but they added some weapons. The Bills and Patriots defense will be able to slow that offense down, I think. That's what I can see happening. And last year, I think it should be noted that they had plenty of special teams and defensive touchdowns that led to wins. And those are kind of hard to come by. I remember in 2018 when the Bears led the league in defensive touchdowns and turnovers. Those plays lead to a lot of wins, but it's hard to kind of do that season after season. So nonetheless, the Dolphins are a great team. They have a great football culture, and I project them to finish third in this division. And the Jets, I have them as last. I think they'll give the Dolphins a run for their money at the third place in this division, but I love Robert Saleh. They still need to figure out what they're doing with Sam Darnold, so we'll kind of know more about this team as the draft approaches. So my fourth power rank division I'm going to get into is the AFC West. The Chiefs, the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Denver Broncos. Those are the teams. I think these are some of the NFL's most exciting teams. Overall, they went 34-30 last year, but they have the best team in the Chiefs. They have one of my Super Bowl contenders for 2021 in the Chiefs. And I see major improvement out of the Chargers and Broncos this year. So the Broncos, I project to go third. I think Vic Fangio is a great defensive coach. I think he needs to show some real improvement this season, and I think players really like him and will play for him. They added Kyle Fuller. They need to figure that quarterback situation out, but the defense will be hard to exploit. So we'll see how that goes. The Raiders, I project them to finish last. They were one of my losers in the offseason. I don't think they have enough talent on defense, and the offensive departures are just going to be too big to overcome for Derek Carr. The Chargers, I project them to finish second. I really think Justin Herbert's going to have a breakout year. He was so good as a rookie. He's the rookie of the year. Really surprised a lot of people just with his overall arm talent, his athleticism, his size, and overall just his playmaking ability, I think, stunned a lot of people. But I think he'll have a breakout year. They hired a new coach in Brandon Staley from the Rams, a young defensive mind. I think the defense is going to improve. Joey Bosa, if they get Derwin James back and healthy, he's a huge impact player on that side of the football. And I truly believe Justin Herbert is going to be a pro-caliber player for the coming years. And the Chiefs, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, but I picked them to finish first. My early Super Bowl pick along with the Bills, but it will be interesting to see kind of how the offensive line adjusts after losing Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz. They added Kyle Long. They'll probably target some offensive linemen in the draft, but they still have the best player in the NFL. They have the best, if not the second best, I would say, coach in the NFL in Andy Reid, so they will be fine. So those are my top 4 divisions. I've got the NFC West, AFC North, AFC East, and AFC West in that order. Now, I'm going to get into a Browns season preview. So those were my thoughts on the top 4 divisions in football. But now I'm going to talk about the Browns. So what led to this Browns team becoming what it is? There's a lot of factors. So it's kind of a wild timeline of events because the Browns were the most miserable franchise for years. They had new head coaches every year, quarterback misery. They were labeled as a cursed franchise. And really, they reached rock bottom with the Hugh Jackson era. He went 1-15, then 0-16, was fired midway through the next season. I don't know how they kept him around. They drafted Baker during Jackson's last season that he got fired in the middle of. Remember, Tyrod Taylor was starting, and then Baker got some opportunities to play after that. They had some improvements after they fired Hugh Jackson with interim head coach Freddie Kitchens. So they made kind of an impulsive decision, and they hired Freddie Kitchens because they were like, let's keep this band together. And that was also a disaster. They went 6-10. The team really just did not like Freddie Kitchens. And the Browns had some big decisions to make after that year. So they fired Jack Dorsey, the general manager, after 2 seasons with the team. I thought that was still very surprising just considering how short he had been in Cleveland. And I think that's just an old Browns move that they would have stuck with Dorsey as their general manager. And they hired a bright, up-and-coming GM in Andrew Barry. He was hired to make the coaching decision, who hired Kevin Stefanski. And then we have the awesome season that the Browns had last year. So in 2020, they were 11-5, still third place in the division, but like I said, that division was loaded. Kevin Stefanski is what they needed as the head coach. He was the coach of the year. They won 4 of their first 5 games, dealt with COVID. They were beating some teams that were probably in the bottom half of the league by not too much, so some people were concerned, but they were still winning football games. That's all that really matters. They dealt with COVID. Myles Garrett missed time. Odell Beckham tears his ACL early in the year. But Baker Mayfield's growth, I think, was the biggest factor in their success. He had 62% completion percentage, threw for 3,500 yards, had 26 touchdowns, and took care of the ball, which I think is the most important thing. Overall, he just looked like a franchise quarterback, and I always loved him in college, everything about him. And this is the first year he really looked like Oklahoma Baker. And I thought the thing that stuck out to me was that he just ran the offense really well, and he ran it the way Kevin Stefanski wanted him to run it. So they completely dismantled the Steelers in the playoffs in the first round. Very well could have beaten the Chiefs, like I said, and they needed to address the back end of the secondary this offseason, and they did with John Johnson. So can the Browns win the Super Bowl? Obviously, anything can happen in football, so I won't rule out a Super Bowl appearance from Cleveland. I think Baker will continue to improve. I think Odell is returning. That's huge for Baker. He's still one of the most talented. He's still, I think, the most talented overall receiver in the NFL. And adding him to that receiving corps of Jarvis Landry, Rashard Higgins, Austin Hooper, that's going to be huge. Odell, Baker's just going to have a plethora of weapons to throw to as he kind of gets his confidence up. I still think they are the best team in the NFC North, like I said. They're a complete team. They can run the ball with Nick Chubb, who's one of the league's best running backs. They can throw. The defense really needs to play at a high level for them to be really good. But I think they're a year away from winning a Super Bowl. I think they can easily make it to the AFC Championship game this year, and they will overall just be a fun team to watch. So now I'm going to get into a little bit of a Deshaun Watson update. I tried to talk about that last week towards the end of the show without much news coming out, but there have been some more lawsuits, and this is a really interesting developing story in the NFL. 16 lawsuits alleging sexual assault and or inappropriate conduct have now been filed against Deshaun Watson. 2 of them being outside the Houston area. Watson's attorney, Rusty Hardin, issued a statement that the allegations were meritless and that any allegation that Deshaun Watson forced a woman to commit a sexual act is completely false. So this is pretty crazy because considering the 2 possible outcomes here, either Deshaun Watson's future in the NFL is highly at risk, And you're talking about his whole reputation being at risk if these allegations are true. Or we're going to have one of the largest smear attempts on someone's public image ever. And you've had people voice their support for Deshaun Watson. Not as many as I'd really expect, just because of this situation. I think it's so serious, and people want things to kind of play out and find more information about it. Deshaun Watson has remained pretty silent. Like I said, his attorney spoke out defending him. Dabo Sweeney voiced his support for Watson. But it seems as if all the football-related news around Deshaun Watson has come to a halt. And until these allegations get figured out, there won't be any more updates on Deshaun Watson's free agency status. But I will try to keep you guys updated on the legal proceedings as they move forward. So that's it for today's show. Thank you guys all for listening. As always, be sure to like, download, subscribe, follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for all of our episodes. Follow us on Facebook. My personal Twitter is at WKrieger3. Thank you all for listening. I hope I covered all the possible football news I could have in this past week. So I'll see you next week for a new episode of the GSMC Football Podcast. This is Wyatt Krieger, signing off.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.